First story. My stepdaughter has been taking photos of me while I sleep. I don't know what to do. I'm really freaking out right now. Apparently, my stepdaughter has been taking photos of me while I sleep. I could really use some help. To back up, 6 months ago, I married my husband, who we'll call Harry. Harry has a daughter from a previous marriage, 13 years old. Lily. I don't have kids. Lily and I have never gotten along. However, in the past few months, since we got married, things have gotten much worse. She used to just ignore me. Now, she's actively aggressive. I found paint on my favorite heels. She accidentally used one of my favorite t-shirts as a cleaning rag. She even spilled some sort of black ink in our bed during an art project or something like that. Who knows? Harry talked to her, over and over again, but he hasn't really disciplined her. I keep telling him she needs to see the consequences of her actions, but he's too much of a softie to actually ground her, or take away her phone, etc. She's going through a tough time, he keeps telling me. Please, just let her be for a few months. I tried to ignore it, but then it got worse. Harry was on a 3-day business trip, so I was completely in charge of Lily, and she amped it up to 11. The very first morning, she came down the stairs wearing one of my necklaces. You can wear my jewelry, but need to ask me for permission first, I told her. I don't need to ask permission for anything, she replied, rolling her eyes. Yes, you do. For the next 3 days, your dad's gone, so you need to listen to me. No, I don't. You're not my mom, she shouted. Then she pulled at the necklace and snapped it right in two. I wanted to scream, but instead, I calmly confiscated her phone. Harry would be furious with me, but I'd had enough. When she got home from school, she ran into her room and locked the door, crying. I explained everything to Harry over the phone. I could hear the annoyance in his voice, but he agreed that she needed to learn, and it was okay to keep her phone for a few days. So I thought things were looking up. Then it happened. Later that night, after Lily went to bed, I wanted to take a picture of our cat, but I grabbed Lily's phone by mistake. And after I took the photo, when I went to the camera reel, I found a photo of myself, sleeping. What? The fic. It was a dark, grainy photo. She hadn't used the flash, but I could still make out my face clearly, smushed against the pillow. Eyes closed, I could make out Harry's silhouette in the background behind me, facing the other way, and my book on the nightstand. Before I could stop myself, I flipped to the next photo, and there was another one of me sleeping, taken from a different angle, taken from below, like she'd been hiding under the bed. Fic. My thumb raced across the screen as I flipped back through the photos. There were dozens of them, dozens of photos of me sleeping. One taken from inside our bathroom, another taken from inside our ficking closet. I looked at the timestamp on them. They were all taken around 2 a.m., over the course of weeks. I tried to call Harry 3 times, but his phone went right to voicemail. It was after midnight, and he had an early meeting tomorrow. He must have turned it off. Come on, I muttered, calling him a 4th time. Jen? I jumped about a foot in the air. Lily was standing behind me, in the semi-darkness. Her wavy hair hung halfway over her face. I backed away. What do you want? I asked, quickly ending the call. I want my phone back. Not tonight, I replied, my heart pounding. Maybe tomorrow. She shrugged. Okay. Then she went back upstairs and into her room. I flipped through the photos one more time. Why in the world would she take these photos? To intimidate me? To scare me? To help her plan of murdering me? Or there was a much more likely, much less sinister reason. She could have taken them to embarrass me. Maybe she planned to post them all over TikTok or Instagram. Me, sleeping with my mouth open, looking like sheet. Really mean of her, but not psychopathic. Still, I locked my door that night anyway. After talking to Harry, I felt better. He thought the same thing. She was taking them to post them online or something. But he was now in total agreement with me. This has gotten out of hand. I'm going to talk to her as soon as I get back. So that was a relief, at least. Can I have my phone back today? Lily asked, when I picked her up from school. If you're really, really nice, I'll give it back, okay? I just locked the bedroom door at night. She couldn't take more photos of me. But later that night, I regretted my promise. Lily was a model kid. She thanked me for dinner. She washed her dishes. She even folded the towels sitting on the dryer. And while I didn't want to give the phone back, I wanted to reward her for being so good. So I gave it back. At 2:30 a.m., I woke with a start. As I sat up in the darkness, I realized what woke me up. A clicking, metallic noise. It was coming from the door. Just as I started to get out of bed, the door creaked open. And there was Lily, with a bobby pin in her hands. She'd picked the lock. "What are you doing?" I hissed. Her eyes went wide. Then she ran back down the hallway towards her room. I jumped out of bed, running after her. Hey, I shouted. "Why are you taking pictures of me?" "Why?" She stopped. Then slowly she turned around. "Dad didn't believe me, so I had to take the pictures." "Didn't believe you? About what?" She didn't say anything. Instead, she handed me her phone. She swiped to the first photo of me, taken in the darkness, grainy and dark. She pointed to the ceiling. "Look." "At what?" "Turn the brightness up." I did, and then I gasped. There was something there, on the ceiling, spindly long shapes crisscrossing each other. Even with the brightness turned way up, it was hard to make out, but there was definitely something there. She flipped to the next photo, and the next. My heart began to pound. It was like watching one of those old flipbook animations. In slow motion, with each swipe, the thing on the ceiling unfolded itself and began reaching for the bed. I stared at the final photo, the one she'd just taken, minutes ago. Me sitting up in bed, my face twisted in anger and shock as I cried out for Lily, and behind me, long, spindly arms reaching for me. The phone fell out of my hands. Dad didn't believe me. When I showed him the pictures, he didn't see it. He yelled at me and said I was reading too many scary stories. So I've been showing them to my friends. We've been trying to figure out what it is, but we don't know. Lily and I are staying at a friend's place for the time being. We're not going back there. Not until we talk to Harry. Not until we figure this out. Does anyone know what this could be? We've been searching non-stop and haven't found anything promising. Second story. I used to give haunted tours of an old town. I used to be a tour guide in a popular tourist town in Tennessee. My job at the time was to take people on a circuitous 2-mile walk around the town, telling them the ghost stories of the people who had lived there. During the summer, tours started a little before sundown and would end well after dark. All in all, it would take us roughly 1-2 hours to get through a tour, depending on the walking speed of my group. Just to preface this, the vast majority of stories we told were not true. They were either largely exaggerated, entirely fabricated, or simply gruesome stories of local murders with a paranormal twist added at the end, with the ghost of the killer still lurking about. I didn't write the script, don't blame me. In fact, I visited a local museum and sourced authentic ghost stories from a curator in order to add a few of my own to the tour, which were actually authentic. That said, there were a handful of times during my stint as a tour guide in which I had experiences that were not so easily explained. In this post, I'm going to detail 3 of the most interesting ones. Story 1. One of the tools we got for our tours were EMF detectors, which I'm sure you're mostly all familiar with. They're intended to scan for electromagnetic frequencies and will detect the relative strength of a signal they pick up. Now, just because one of these things goes off doesn't mean you're seeing a ghost. They also pick up power lines and will go off like crazy near a generator. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and you suddenly get a strong signal, it's worth looking into. Now, these detectors we used had about 5 lights on them, changing in hue from green to yellow to red. Red meant no signal, and green indicates a strong signal. The light never goes below red unless you turn the thing off. That's the baseline. At the end of our tour, we would come to an old graveyard, nobody buried there in at least 100 years. After I did my thing with the final story, people would wander around and look at the graves with flashlights and scare themselves sheetless. But one night as they were wandering, a man called me over to see one of the graves. I went over and had a look, and saw what the problem was. Whenever he passed his EMF detector over this particular grave, all the lights would turn off. The entire machine would turn itself off when it was over this grave, and turn back on as soon as you moved it away. We tried with a couple other graves, but only this one had the effect. We were curious about the grave, so we tried to read the name of the person, but the headstone was too worn down for us to read it. The first name, Thomas, was faintly able to be read, but the surname was too hard to read. We had the whole group, 5 people leaning over it at this point trying to read it, when we all heard the same thing. As one of the group wondered aloud what the man's surname was, a loud voice from behind us shouted, "Whaley!" As you may have guessed, there was nobody behind us when we turned around, and we called the tour to a close shortly after that. I never messed with that specific grave again, except to place some flowers on it one time, as was my habit every once in a while, since nobody visited that place anymore. Story 2. At the end of the tour, sometimes I would get tips if people had fun, got spooked. Older boomer and Gen X men really enjoy the charade of the covert handshake tip, where they palm you the money as they shake your hand. I always indulged the bit, because hey, I was getting a tip. One tour I ran had a family of 3, mother, father, daughter, and an older man who I initially thought was grandpa, but later learned had been lumped into their group because we didn't run solo tours. The old guy was pretty quiet throughout the tour, but would occasionally ask very pointed questions that stood out to me as odd. I don't remember most of his questions anymore. This was years ago. But one example is that I was telling a story of a girl who fell from a balcony, and her ghost haunts the river she plummeted into to this day. And he asked me if I thought she died right away when she hit the ground, or whether I thought she died slow and suffered. Just weird things like that. Well, at the end of the tour, the family took off into the graves to have a look about, see if ghosts would show up in their pictures, etc. Old man came to give me that typical handshake, and mentally I was thinking that all his weird behavior could be easily forgotten if he tipped well. The handshake was normal except that his hand was ice cold, but old folks have cold hands, so I didn't think about it too much. Except he didn't palm me $1, he palmed me a coin. I thought it was a $50 when I felt it at first, but it was too big. I turned to glance at the guy as he walked past me to leave, and I sheet you not, he was just gone. The path leaving the graveyard was downhill, and you had visibility from the top for at least 300 feet. There was no way he could have covered that distance in that time, and I didn't even hear running. Just this old, tottering man in front of me 1 second and gone in the blink of an eye when he walked past me. When I got home and looked up the coin, I learned it was a 1 troy ounce silver bullion, minted to an older year. I don't remember exactly. I can check the year when I get home this evening if anyone cares. Overall, the experience left me a little shocked, and the family agreed he was really odd when I walked them back to their car. Apparently, the guy greeted their daughter by name when they arrived at the meetup spot a few minutes before me, but they had no idea who he was. Story 3. So 2 weird experiences, but no ghostly apparitions or demonic screams. Unfortunately, most nights on the ghost tour were entirely mundane. However, I have got one more odd story I experienced which really set my belief of ghosts in stone. One of the earlier stops in our tour was an old cabin where the town's progenitor once lived. The cabin has been moved around a couple of times to build parking garages, but has since been placed back on its original spot. We don't actually have a photo of the woman who founded the town, but we have got pictures of her granddaughter, who everyone at the time swore was a dead ringer for her grandmother. Because of this, an old black and white photo of her granddaughter is on the sign outside the cabin. The cabin is kept locked up with a padlock at all times except when the Historical Society opens it up for school groups. The windows are so dirty you can't see inside, and most of the time it's too dark to get a decent look inside anyway. Regardless, I like to encourage people to peek through the cracks in the old wood because they'd psych themselves into thinking they saw something move, and a spooky tour is a tour with good tips. Anyway, one night after I did the whole spiel about her founding the town, and how people say they can see her ghost within the cabin on some nights to this day, I let them all have a go at peeking inside. One of the younger teens in the group approached me after looking inside, and we had a very odd conversation. These kids, 13, 16, usually think it makes them cool to be skeptical and show everyone they're not scared. So he asked me something like, "Who's in the costume?" I was a little confused and explained how the photo on the sign is a picture of the granddaughter of the town's founder, but that she wasn't wearing a costume. That was how people dressed at the time. The little sheet rolled his eyes and told me he meant the woman in the cabin. Of course I had to have a look, so I peeked through, and sure enough, a street light was shining through the dirty windows and letting in a diffuse sort of light, and you could just make out a figure in a rocking chair sitting in the corner of the dark cabin, rocking back and forth. It was hard to get a good look at her, but from what I saw, She did look just like the woman in the photo. I moved the group on pretty fast because, quite frankly, I was a little afraid it was a homeless person who'd broken in somehow. If it was, I had a group of 6 kids and 1 parent. Homeschoolers, I think. I didn't want anybody getting hurt or snatched. But I stopped by the cabin again on the way to my car, and the lock was on tight and undamaged. I peeked inside again, and there wasn't even a rocking chair in the cabin. In the whole time I worked the tour route, roughly 2 years, I never saw a chair in that cabin again, or any old women for that matter. Third story. I saw someone that I wasn't supposed to see. I was once working as a receptionist at a 5-star resort that's about 45 minutes away from the city center. Everyone who has worked in tourism and/or hospitality knows that there are certain periods during the year where it's busier than usual, i.e. peak season. This incident happened during peak season. The resort was overbooked and guests were checking into their rooms one after another at the reception counter. I was almost done checking in this nice, lovely couple when I saw this family of 5 standing behind them and tried to finish up the whole check-in process so I could assist the family that was next in line. You must be thinking that when I said family of 5, it's the parents and 3 kids, right? But it's actually 2 kids and 1 elderly woman who at that time I assumed was either the husband's or wife's mother. Now the resort's policy was to get the details of every guest that was staying in the resort, and it is for a good reason, safety. It's the same reason that all airlines are doing when they obtain their passengers' info. So I told the husband that we needed everyone's details, and he just said, "Sure, no problem." And of course I was expecting 5 names on the registration form. By the time I realized there were only 4 names. The family were already at the concierge area to pick up their luggage and then left to go to their rooms. I couldn't go after them as I was assisting another guest. Like I said, it was peak season. So all I could do was just watch them from afar. Walking towards the elevators, then disappeared from sight. The whole time they were walking, the old woman just followed them from behind quietly, but I didn't give much thought to it and went right back to assist the guest that was in front of me. After the buzz had died down at around 4 p.m., I decided to ring the family's room to inform them that there were missing details. The husband came down to the reception alone, and I told him I needed the info of his or his wife's mother's info. This man just stood there, stared at me for what felt like a minute and said, "It's only my wife and I and our 2 kids." Me being confused, obviously said, "But sir, I saw there were 5 of you." At this point I thought he was lying to avoid paying for a 3rd-person charge for one of the rooms. They got 2 rooms, and 1 room has only enough amenities for 2 people. Same goes for the buffet breakfast that's included. He took another minute and asked me what did this elderly woman look like. To which I explained that she had gray hair and it was short, like a bob haircut. I also told him that she was wearing this red cheongsam shirt, similar to this with a long black slack pants. Right as I told him that, he quickly took out his phone, frantically scrolled for a few seconds and showed me a picture of the same woman in the same clothes lying in a closed coffin that had a clear glass cover so you could still look inside. I just nodded slightly, and he said that it's his mother. She died unexpectedly a few months ago. I was, to no surprise, too shocked to say anything at this point, but somehow managed to mutter the words, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Sir and I'm so sorry about this." He just said it was okay, gave me a small smile, then left without saying anything. When they checked out 2 days later, we just pretended like that whole thing never happened. Luckily enough, the elderly woman was not there. Still get goosebumps just thinking about it till this day.